everyone, and welcome to the Ask the Expert session for delivering developer velocity through the entire engineering system. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Anthony Cangelosi. I'm the group product manager for a few teams at Microsoft. One is the Visual Studio Core platform team, and the other one is the developer productivity services team, where we've been excited to bring to you a couple new services in our team. And I am lucky to be joined by two of the best looking members of our team, Aaron Patterson and Sagar Chandra Reddy, and I will let them introduce themselves and where their role is on the team. Aaron, why don't you get started?
Hi, I'm Aaron Patterson. I'm a principal software engineer working on Microsoft DevBoxes. I've been working on cloud-based DevBox solutions for around 5 years, and I've worked on cloud-based DevBoxes that whole time. And I'm really pleased to tell you about the Microsoft DevBoxes and how we've been able to leverage them for the development work on the product itself.
Great, thank you, Aaron. And Sagar, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure, Anthony. Hi, everyone. I'm Sagar Lankala, and I'm a senior product manager on the developer productivity services team. I'm passionate about building products that delight customers and help them to be more productive. Today, I'm excited to be talking about the two new services that we launched, Microsoft DevBox and Azure deployment environments.
Thank you, Sagar. And behind the scenes, we are supported by four of the smartest folks on our team. We have Michael Stark, who is our principal engineering manager, as well as Trent Byfield, one of his peers and partners is an engineering manager. We also have Nirja Singareddy, who is our group engineering manager and illustrious engineering leader. And not to be left behind, Varun Gupta, our principal PM lead for the team. They'll be on the chat answering questions as we also discuss them here in the chat. So please feel free to give us any of your hardest questions that we can tackle. Either someone in the chat room will tackle them, or we'll even bring them into the session themselves. Feel free to use the voting buttons that'll help us know which are the most important questions that folks want us to tackle and target here in the group. To get us started, though, I really want to kind of kick off and just reiterate that I'm really excited about the two services that we announced today, Microsoft DevBox and Azure deployment environments. These services are going to be in private preview and will be available in public preview in the next few months. We have a sign-up link that you can see here for signing up to join the list to participate in the private previews if you'd like to get started early and be a part of giving feedback. We also have some blog posts that if you look inside of the chat session, you'll see some information to learn more about the service. Not to mention, we had a great session we just presented that went into a really great deep dive with lots of demos and content that we can share there. So while we have folks kind of joining our session and adding in their questions, I'll maybe kick it off with our first question for Aaron, and I'll ask him maybe to speak a little bit about what makes Microsoft DevBox, as one of the two services we announced today, important, and what are some of the challenges that we think we can solve today?
So I think some of the key things that make Microsoft DevBox super valuable to me as a developer is the ability to get the ready-to-code development experience very quickly. I personally will create DevBox to utilize, and I'll have another spare one sitting there ready to go so I can hop forward and start working on my next task. So being able to have that DevBox ready to go super quick and keep your productivity going is super valuable to me as a developer.
Aaron, this may date us a bit, but I do remember a time when we used to hoard workstations under our desk, as it was an extra machine for us to have as parallelized compute. And you'd walk by teams' offices and you'd see these rows of workstations under their desk as if they were collecting them like cards. Was that what your team was like? Because it certainly was how my team was organized.
Yes. So years and years ago, I worked on Team Foundation Server, and that was exactly the scenario we had. We would all have multiple very powerful dev boxes sitting under our desk with KVM switches, and we would hop back and forth between them as we were working on different areas of the product, just because switching branches, even at that point in time, was super heavyweight. Eventually, we moved to virtualization so we could have even more dev boxes ready to go, but we still had the multiple physical machines sitting under our desk so that we could hop back and forth.
Sure. So Sagar, maybe I'll switch to you now and ask, maybe why don't you share with folks what are some of the capabilities that you think will, developers will most appreciate from the Microsoft DevBox service?
Sure. As Aaron mentioned, Microsoft DevOps is a service that enables developers to self-serve high-performance workstations, not just one, and they'll be able to have multiple workstations or dev boxes at the same time, which are pre-configured and ready to code for their specific projects. Developers gain access to secure self-service workstations that are pre-configured, but at the same time, development teams will be able to customize these workstations with any developer IDE, SDK, code repo, or internal tools that they need to work on. They can also control costs by hibernating unused machines, and developers will be able to resume and pick them where they left off without affecting any productivity. More importantly, dev infra and IT administrators can maintain the greater security and compliance by managing these dev boxes through Intune, just like any other device on their network.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. I'm just starting to see folks are starting to trickle in with some great questions here. So I'm going to switch over now to one of the published questions I see here. An anonymous question came in. Can you speak to some to the similarities or differences between the DevBox solution and the Azure Game Development VM? Aaron, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yep. So the DevBox solution. Some of the advantages, as Sagar had mentioned, is it's a fully managed VM. It is Intune enrolled, domain joined. It's set up to enforce your enterprise's security policies. And it is a powerful dev box. The game dev VMs are not currently managed, but we're working with that team, and we're going to make sure that the game dev solutions are definitely integrated into the Microsoft DevBox product.
For sure, Aaron. And so actually that brings up a question that comes to mind that I've seen some of our early customers in user studies ask is how do we deal with, do we have to worry about noisy neighbors or, kind of competing for compute on these dev boxes?
So absolutely not. So these dev boxes are dedicated virtual machines for each individual user. So you get the compute and storage all to yourself. You don't have to worry about somebody else kicking off a heavyweight build and slowing down your own workflow.
And Aaron, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe we plan on having a pretty wide range of SKUs, everything from 4 core all the way up to 32 core, at least as our first kind of out of the gate set of SKUs. What will we have in terms of memory and storage size, Aaron?
So I believe that we'll support storage sizes up through at least 1 terabyte. I believe even larger than that. And memory sizes, I don't remember the exact specs, but it was 32 gig.
Something in the spec sheet of about up to 128 gigabytes on the 32 core devices. So quite a bit of memory for a pretty wide range of workloads, whether we're talking about development, data engineering, things that really are going to take advantage of that memory compute.
Absolutely.
So Sagar, I see a question now kind of going back to the discussion in the chat. Someone asked, so DevBox's ties to Intune, I guess, wanted to learn a little bit more. Aaron mentioned Intune. Sagar, can you expand a little bit more about how we integrate with Intune and Microsoft device management services?
Sure, Anthony. So whenever a dev box is created, it's pre-configured to be domain joining to their CarpNet, to enterprise's CarpNet, and automatically enrolled with Intune. Intune is one of the prerequisites of using dev boxes. And once the once a DevBox is enrolled with Intune, the IT administrators will be able to access it in Microsoft Endpoint Manager portal, and they'll be able to perform any operations that they do on-prem physical devices as well. And they'll be able to do patches, update the software, or schedule these upgrades, software upgrades, as they do with on-prem physical devices today.
Yeah, and we've had a really great partnership with the Windows 365 team. We started working with them a little over a year ago, as it was an exciting opportunity for us to really expand the scenarios where we can offer virtualized compute, and really kind of connecting the expertise that team had in terms of building and integrating with endpoint management and our Intune solutions, together with kind of bringing kind of the best of breed developer experiences for a single service. Going back to you, Sagar, so what are some of the, if you think about Cloud PC and Windows 365 and DevBox service, what are some of the differences between the services? How are DevBoxes distinct and different?
Yeah, that's a great question. And we have seen this in several of the sessions this morning too. DevBox is built on top of Windows 365. It's a managed solution that is focused towards providing an optimized experience for the developers. Windows 365 was announced last year, and it is primarily focused towards information worker scenarios. It is great to provide a general productivity workstation in the cloud. When we speak to customers, we often see that they would like to provide a general productivity virtual machine for a information worker, or even in the case of developers as well, they would like to provide a general productivity VM, but they would like to provide a pre-configured machine in the cloud that is ready to code, and the developer need not spend any time on configuring the machine once they get it. So that is one of the primary differences. Apart from that, in Windows 365, the machine is provisioned to the end user, whereas in DevBox, developers are empowered to create a machine on demand, which is pre-configured and ready to go. They'll be able to create multiple dev boxes at the same time, and let's say if a developer is working on a new bug, without poisoning their primary machine, they'll be able to create a new machine within minutes and work on that bug, and once that is done, they'll be able to delete that machine too.
That's a great point, Sagar. Really about kind of the focus of ensuring that we gave developers the flexibility and control. I remember when we talked to a lot of customers early on about the challenges they faced as developers in an organization, that balance of having the flexibility they needed to be able to move quickly, because the tools they're using are changing, the packages and the technologies change quite rapidly, and they need that flexibility to be able to manage their environment. And so, I'll kind of touch on one of the questions here that, said, hey, may seem like a dumb question, but, do you have admin rights? Not at all a dumb question, but it's absolutely a critical question that, yes, you can configure developers in your team to have admin rights within the dev boxes that are there. And that was a critical thing that we heard from end users who, were asking about, what would be required for a service, that they had the flexibility that still fits within their organization, within their IT org. Now, there are some, organizations that have very strict policies that don't allow admin rights within their dev boxes. And if that's an organizational policy, you can set that too within dev boxes. So you can really kind of define it to meet what your team needs within a dev box. And so there's another question here with respect to Aaron, I'll pass this one on to you. Since DevBox VMs are connected to the enterprise's network infrastructure, will two different DevBox instances be able to communicate with each other? For example, if you need to debug both ends of a client server application.
Yep, that's a great question. So there are multiple different options for configuring these dev boxes. So we support both native Azure Active Directory joined as well as hybrid Active Directory joined virtual machines. So in each of those cases, you're connected, these dev boxes are connected to a VNet that's hosted in your Azure subscription. So depending on the configuration of the VNet, which is owned by you, the customer, you should be able to, as long as there isn't any networking rules preventing it, you should be able to communicate with all of the other boxes on that virtual network. In the case of the hybrid Active Directory joined, you'll have the connection to your corporate network and line of sight to the domain controller. And with that, you'll also be able to access both ends of the connection. So you'll be able to access the dev box from the corporate network and devices on the corporate network can also access the dev box. So.
Cool. And maybe kind of, Aaron, sticking on this theme about kind of IT concerns and considerations about picking the right virtualization service, how are updates handled for both the OS as well as tools within a dev box? How are those handled in our service?
So ultimately, the updates are controlled by the IT organization, either through Intune or through the group policy on their domain. So anything that Intune supports in terms of device compliance can be done to ensure that critical updates are deployed to these dev boxes or critical software updates are deployed to the dev boxes to make sure that the security posture for the enterprise remains safe. So, and that is one of the critical pieces of the Microsoft DevBox solution is that these devices are all managed by the enterprise's IT organization. So they're in the same policies which are enforced on your physical devices. The ones sitting under your desk are enforced on these dev boxes that are hosted in the cloud.
Yeah, and I think that's something that a lot of teams of pretty much any size are going to be pretty excited about when we look at how things like endpoint managers, analytics services that give you device health and the ability to understand kind of how devices across your entire org are running operationally. IT admins will be able to see, hey, is a dev box running too high on compute and using all of its CPU and basically not able to keep up with the developer workload and go off to a team and recommend, a higher SKU for this particular task and use that kind of analysis and ways to really inform how to keep their teams efficient and productive. You mentioned kind of updates. There are, the zero-day patches that can be deployed with endpoint management. And really, ultimately, you get a single pane of glass for managing all of your both physical and virtual devices from within one place. Kind of maybe shifting back, kind of coming back from the IT org, and let's talk a little bit about the developer. Sagar, what tools and technologies can you deploy into a dev box?
That's a great question, Anthony. With Microsoft DevBox, we are aiming to empower development teams to build any application on any tech stack using any tool. As a service is starting with Windows support at this point of time, any tool that works on Windows OS can be installed on the DevBox. DevBoxes also support developing and debugging applications cross-platform that run on Linux using the Windows subsystem for Linux.
Yeah, and so not really limited to Visual Studio, although one of the things I can say is, kind of representing the other half of our team is that we're really looking kind of carefully at how we bring together the best of, the DevBox service and taking advantage of being able to run in the cloud from our client tools to be able to, kind of leverage things like the roaming setting service that will not only deploy the tools into the environment, but now when you start up and use Visual Studio, you're able to get all of your developer settings in one place. And we're really looking closely at kind of the end-to-end of the developer experience to make it the best we can inside of Visual Studio. Sagar, there was another question here in the chat about kind of licensing. How is licensing handled? Do we provide the licenses for the software that's deployed, or is it a bring your own license kind of model?
So apart from, we have introduced Microsoft DevBox as a pre-configured machine that's ready to code. But apart from that, development teams will be able to further install any tools of their choice to carry out the development activities. With regards to licenses specifically, DevBoxes use a bring your own license approach. So as long as the development team has a license for the application and it runs on Windows, they can deploy it on the DevBox and run it.
Cool. Thank you, Sagar. Yeah, and so it really is kind of whatever you already have, kind of permission to deploy, you can deploy them inside of a dev box. Are there any particular, kind of to make sure we're kind of talking about both what's great about the service and things that we have, where we need to grow? There was a question here, are there any key limitations when compared to Azure VM capabilities that, are worth folks thinking about as they're considering the dev box service, Sagar?
That's a good point. So we are starting with a limited set of SKUs. We are aiming to target more developer optimized workloads. So we are starting with a limited set of SKUs, 4 core, 8 core, 16 core, and 32 core. When we look at Azure Compute VM, there are many options. There's a lot of flexibility to choose between the several set of SKUs, and I think that was intentional as well, because Azure Compute VMs are used for generic purposes. It might vary from a normal productivity VM to a test virtual machine, or for using as part of a pipeline. So there might be different scenarios in which a compute VM can be used, but we are focusing primarily on the developer desktop scenario, and that is the reason we are starting with a limited set of SKUs. Having said that, we will be actively monitoring for feedback on any additional SKUs that needs to be supported to support a wider variety of developer scenarios.
Yeah, and Azure VMs, Sagar, are there as a service that can be used from everything from using it as a desktop, as some folks use it, to actually running and deploying applications for many scenarios as it's done today. So I mean, built into that is the flexibility that enterprises on Azure can take advantage of. One of the things that I recall hearing a lot about was around kind of teams that have had to invest quite a bit of infrastructure to build up and manage virtualized environments themselves to kind of really get something that works for developers. And that was something that really kind of pushed us in this direction, was the need for something more managed, more scoped, and kind of took a lot of the overhead of managing these virtualized environments kind of out of the picture, so that these dev teams can kind of get back to focusing on the code that they wanted. And so we tried to make sure that we found that right balance between kind of flexibility, but really kind of not having to worry about things like provisioning and hosting those environments, and kind of projecting how much compute you need in a particular region in a period of time, as well as simplifying kind of the process of what configurations you need to be concerned about, because a lot of that is already done for you. Not to mention, we talked quite a bit about in-tune enrollment, domain enrollment. These are things that kind of are not brain surgery, but certainly take time and are complex and need to be managed by teams. So I think we have a lot of opportunity to help folks by taking that out of their hands. And so, I want to make sure we give a little bit of time also to the other service we talked about today, Azure Deployment Environments, which was also, we think, is a pretty impactful one. One of the questions here in the chat was, can you clarify, Sagar, the differences between those two services for us?
That's a good question. So I think I'm assuming the question is about Microsoft Dev. What are the differences between DevBox and deployment environments? That's so right. DevBox is focused towards providing a desktop in the cloud, which the developers will use to build their applications, write code, and build their applications. Whereas deployment environments is focused towards providing the infrastructure that is required to deploy this code and run their application. For cloud native applications, there might be a bunch of Azure resources that are required to deploy and run the application. So deployment environments is basically a collection of different resources that are required to run the application. And with deployment environments, development teams will be able to self-serve these environments again by using curated infrastructure as code templates that have been provided by the central teams. While developers have all the access to create an environment on their own, the control is still with the central teams, because they'll be able to pre-configure all the Azure governance related criteria, so that the developer can just pick one of the templates, decide the type of environment that they are creating, and just deploy it, and then use it to deploy their code, perform testing, or use it for staging or pre-production or production purposes.
And we have, the questions of the chat are kind of almost following the conversation. And, so I want to kind of grab the next one on the list. And Anonymous asked if an environment requires multiple microservices in their applications. Does deployment environments help manage this? Or will we need to maintain the environments and the version of the application? Dev environments, for example, is constantly changing.
That's another great question. So one of the key challenges that we have heard from customers when we were speaking during the early product development was that the infrastructure on which the applications run are also changing constantly, and they would like to have the ability to evolve the environment as they build the product, build their applications. So deployment environments will support creation of multiple resources in Azure as part of the environment. And like, let's say if the environment needs to be upgraded or updated to include another Azure service, they'll be able to just perform a simple redeployment, and they'll be able to get using an updated template, and then the additional resource get added, or an existing resource can be scaled. Like, let's say if a Cosmos DB is using 500 RUs, they'll be able to, upon redeployment, it can be configured to use 2000 RUs and scale the resource as well. Apart from that, we are looking into providing template versioning support as well. So that way, when if a template is updated in the source control repository, upon redeployment, they'll be able to ensure if they want to pick the latest version of the template or just keep using the earlier version, just to make sure that the environment is not breaking.
Thanks, Sagar. And Aaron, I guess I want to hear from you on the deployment environments. Are there any particular scenarios that you think stand out for teams to be, as they're thinking about how deployment environments would fit into their workflow?
Yeah, so I think that in general, the Microsoft DevBox and deployment environments go really well hand in hand. From your DevBox, you can start doing all your coding and deploy to your Azure deployment environment. These both give the IT the control they need to enforce all of the enterprise's governance, and the developers the flexibility they need to not only deploy to their development environments, but to their production environments. So as you're using the Azure deployment environments, it's not just your day-to-day dev environment that can be used. You can use this for deploying to your pre-production as well as production environments, so that you can have consistency in your deployment all the way across through the pipeline, as well as the versioning, which was Sagar had mentioned. And controlling all of this through infrastructure as code, you'll be able to see the history and changes to those environments. So I think those are all great aspects to how the Azure development environments are set up. And I think the ability that we have for controlling the access to these subscriptions, such that developers don't need to have direct access to the subscription to deploy, really makes it powerful, allowing them to do safe rollouts to pre-production and production environments.
That's great. And you mentioned kind of safe rollouts. Is this something that you see being integrated into pipelines and kind of a Git flow end to end, or how do you see that kind of integrating?
Yeah, absolutely. So we definitely see Azure development environments being integrated into release pipelines, such that you're using the Azure development environments to perform those deployments to the different environments in an automated fashion.
Now, one of the things that we haven't gone as deep on in our sessions, but folks will learn more about as we get to the public preview, is the DevBox service and the deployment environment service share some common capabilities. For example, they're both part of the, they both share a parent resource that's the project that brings them together. Are there any benefits that teams will get by having a project that kind of brings together the DevBoxes together with their deployment environments?
Absolutely. So having all of this structured under the dev centers and projects that we have has benefits not only for the team, but for the enterprise. So for the team, they can see the costs for their project, not only the dev boxes, but also the environment. So on a project by project basis, we'll be able to give a breakdown of how much Azure spend is actually being incurred. Then from the organization perspective, the IT admins will be able to curate the images and software that developers can use on these dev boxes, as well as the types of infrastructure that can be deployed through the development environments. So, and that will then be curated on a project by project basis, since not every project really needs access to every VM size. Some projects will need beefier development machines, and others will need much smaller machines.
Just to add on top of that, what we also hear from customers is they would like to manage these policies or settings and apply them to a set of projects. Like, for example, if a group of teams are working on front-end related projects, they might be using the same set of templates. They might be using the same images that would be used in DevBox and deployment environment. So they do not want to recreate or separately provision these to each of the projects. So with the resource structure that we are creating in both the services, IT administrators will be provide the same set of templates and images to multiple projects, and that will help them manage and govern these cloud engineering teams more efficiently.
Thank you, Sagar, and thank you, Aaron. I really appreciate you guys taking the time to dive into these questions. And for everybody who joined the session, please do visit the breakout session if you haven't watched it yet. In the chat, you'll find the sign-up links for the private preview list to join that there, and please share us your feedback. We'd love to hear more, and we'll reach out to you again soon. Thank you, everybody, also on the subject matter list for tackling our questions, and I hope everybody enjoys Build. Have a great day.